Hello and welcome to the second round of the Staufe Open. This time I played a player with around 2100 rating and I had the black pieces. After the draw in the first round, I obviously wanted to bounce back, get my first win, and hopefully play some better opponents in the next rounds. But playing with black, it can always be quite difficult to create some imbalances and try to get an active position. So you have to choose your openings wisely. And we see in the game that it can be quite tricky sometimes. Okay, let's start with the game. My opponent played knight f3, which is one of the not so usual moves. I mean, it's radio opening, so it is played at some points and now it also gained a lot of traction because of Kamer, this famous Kamer reti, but it doesn't attack like one of the squares directly with one of the pawns. It's not like e4, d4, or c4. It rather attacks it with a knight and wants to keep the pawn moves flexible. And one of the most common reactions is what I played as well. It's d5. Rather than also replaying with some knight moves, we want to attack the center directly and gain control of it directly with a pawn. And ideally, we would also like to play e5 as well, which we come to, which we will come to very soon. He played g3, which is the old reti, I would call it, and it can always transpose into some King's Indian attacks from the white side. They usually want to go bishop g2, castle, then maybe some d3, e4. That are the usual plans for white. But they can always go back into some d4 systems as well. What I like to do here is try to grab the center directly with black, which is not possible in one move. We can't play e5 one move because it's hanging. But there are some options. You can play knight e7, knight c6, or what I played in the game, g6, to try and support this e5 square. The bishop g2, bishop g7. I now want to go e5. The idea is, okay, if they just continue developing on the king side, we just grab the center by force, play e5, and after that we can look what we do, but we have the center pawns. My opponent didn't allow it and played d4, which is quite logical as well. He just doesn't want to give me the square on e5, just doesn't want to allow me to get a beautiful center with black, and instead he opts for symmetry. Now we have both played d4, we have both sphere and shadowed our bishops, so we get actually a symmetrical position, which can be quite hard if you want to play for a win. But okay, we don't really have any options, and I played bishop knight f6, not bishop f6, knight f6, and okay, I want to develop as well, because those are some just the usual moves you have to play. You have to get your pieces out, which is rule number 1 in chess. He castled, I castled as well. Here he played c3, which is rather a timid move. Normally, they play c4 and try to attack the center, because if you take, they get the bishop out. But it can be quite tricky if you don't know the theory. After the game, my opponent also told me that he wasn't too familiar with this line, at least with the c4 dc4 line, and he didn't want to go into anything that he thought I knew better than him. And that's why he played c3, which is quite timid, but still. I mean, he protects the pawn, he creates a pawn chain, which is always really nice against my bishop. And he wants to develop further with knight bd2, knight e5, and then play the game from there on. Here I decided, okay, I need to do something. I can't really let the symmetry go on forever, and I tried to force it to some degree. I played a5. The idea is simple. I want to go a4, create this huge space advantage for me. And if I actually get it, it feels really nice because all the pieces from right are really cramped in, and he will have a hard time to actually show what he has for the space advantage. Because in those kind of positions, it's not actually net necessary to develop so fast. It is a closed position where it's not so easy to break the center. So with all my pieces on the 8th rank, it's actually not such a huge problem because you can always develop them later on. Here he probably should have played a4, but he went for knight bd2, which is a slight mistake. Like I already said, now I can push a4, and I already have a really nice position. Instead he should have went for a4 himself, and here there are some ideas for black. You can either play c5, b6, Because if you play b6, for example, you actually have a slightly different position than white, because you played b6, a4, a5 instead of c3. Now you can maybe go for some bishop b7, c5, which can be at least some interesting way to play. d5 directly is also possible, which can also lead to some interesting play, but I don't want to go too deep into that right now. Okay, he played knight bd2, and after a4, like I said, I have a really nice position. Because now this pawn on a4 is like a sting in the white position, because you can't get rid of it. And in endgames, these pawns are really passive, and you can maybe attack them later on. So it always feels nice to push pawns on the side in those kind of close positions, because you actually gain a lot of space, and it's really favorable. He played knight e5, and here I answered with c6. I just wanted to also get this pawn on c6, b7, and d5 to counteract this bishop on the long diagonal, which is really nice. He played knight df3, further activating his pieces, and I played knight bd7. I thought, okay, I mean, he had 3 tempies more, but I can just trade the pieces off he put on active squares. And that was my main idea. Okay, he didn't want to trade, obviously, because, I mean, I gained the space, lost a bit of time, but if he trades his active pieces now, then he has a huge problem, so he went knight d3. And here I went for a bit of an error. I should have just went on and also activated my pieces. I played b6 in the game with the idea of, okay, this knight doesn't have such a great square, so maybe I put the bishop on b7 or a6 and activate it that way. And also take away the square c5 from the knight on d3. But in reality, I should have just played knight d4 myself, with the same idea that he did, just activate all the pieces. And then we still have the similarities in the position, but I have the pawn on a4, which is like the long-term asset. So I just have to activate my pieces. So I didn't follow the basic rule of chess and develop everything. So it happens to everyone. I played b6, which was quite a bit of a mistake, which we also see later. Because after bishop f4, bishop b7, I completely underestimated his move. He found a really strong move with b4. And in the game, I thought it's actually a mistake, which it isn't at all. He actually closes the position on the queen side completely, which can be really annoying for me. Because now my plan is not so clear. I can take en passant, but does that help me? Not really. On the A line, on the A file, probably everything gets traded anyways. So it's not really a choice, like not really an option for me. I can close with b5, but does that really help me? Then I can't make any progress on the queen side anymore. So it's also not really an option. What I had left was knight e4. A couple of moves too late, but okay. I at least tried to develop my knights now. Played rook c1, and I played knight e6. Maybe also going for the c4 square, because that's maybe the one weakness he has after playing b4. And here he made a crucial error, which actually I think made the game really difficult for him. He should have played knight d2, just to keep an eye on the c4 square and maybe trade the knights if I ever get to the c4 square. But he panicked a bit and played bishop takes d6. After e takes d6, now I have the bishop pair, and actually such a nice position, because I still have the pawn on a4. I can maybe put the bishop on a6, maybe put the rook on e8, and now my plan is actually quite simple, which makes the position way easier to play. I just put my pieces on the good squares, rook to e8, queen to e7, bishop to a6, and I don't really have to think about my moves that much anymore. He played c4, which opens the position, but he wanted to create some counterplay, maybe opening his bishop on the long diagonal. I took, because an open position is also favorable for me. If you have the bishop pair, you always want an open position, and we can soon see why, because the bishops can be a real menace on those squares. He took back, and I played rook e8. Just starting to activate my pieces, maybe play queen e7 next, maybe put the rook somewhere if the pawn on a4 is not hanging anymore, some bishop a6, some c5. There are a couple of ideas. Maybe some d5 followed by bishop a6. Okay, he went back with the rook because he thought this rook on c4 was a bit exposed. He played rook c2, and he also guarded the e2 pawn. I played queen e7. I continue. The pawn on e2 is not hanging, but I activate my pieces, and maybe in the future it's hanging. and it's not so easy to play for white. And it actually showed, because here he already made a mistake. The best would have been probably to play e3, protect this pawn, maybe shut down my bishop a bit, but it's not too easy to make such kind of moves, because it's also not a move you want to make. It's rather slow, and you can feel like maybe you get overwhelmed with the position, because you don't really have many moves afterwards, and it can be quite hard and quite tricky to play and find plans, passive positions, and it can lead to errors, like it happened in the game. He played d5, which was an interesting idea. He sacked the pawn, but if I take back, he can maybe control the d4 square, and my pawns will be really weak on d5 and d6. So obviously I don't take the pawn sacrifice. I play c5. And now you can already see the might of this bishop on g7. No one can stop him. He doesn't have his dark square bishop anymore. So this is just a monster. Can't do anything. He took on c5, I took back, and he played e4. Trying to protect this d5 pawn, which was also a liability and also quite weak. But actually now that allows me to put my bishop on this diagonal, and now we can see what I talked about earlier. If you have the bishop pair, just put them on the open diagonals, try to get an open position, and it's gonna be increasingly difficult for your opponent. Now there's even this pin on the knight can't move anymore without the rook being attacked. The bishop on g7 controls everything, he controls even the b2 square, so this rook can't even go on the open file. And now it's already really, really hard for white. He played rook e1, he went out of the pin, which is logical. And I just went rook a b8. I wanted to go on the open file myself. He can't really do anything against it. He can't trade the rooks with rook b2 because it's controlled. And yeah, just activate my pieces slowly. And here he kind of panicked again, because maybe he can do some slow stuff. Maybe try to put this bishop on f1 and try to exchange one of my bishops. But he said, okay, I will slowly get clamped at this position, and he wanted to do something by force. And that's where he tried to sack a pawn again, which was interesting, but it, unfortunately for him, luckily for me, it wasn't enough. He played e5. His idea was, okay, I want to open up my bishop by force by sacrificing e5, and after pawn takes d6, sacrificing 2 pawns. He wins a pawn back, and afterwards he has an open bishop, but unfortunately for him it's not enough, because in the end, after I takes on c5, and I can't take back with a knight because my queen's hanging, but I can just trade the queens first, and after rook takes queen, knight takes knight, rook takes knight. After all those exchanges, we end up in an endgame, which is really open, like the bishops are really open, and I'm a pawn up. So I already knew in the game, okay, now this should be enough, but it still turned out to be a bit tricky. I had to find a couple of accurate moves. First, I play rook b2. I wanted to grab the pawn on a2, and then just try to queen the pawn. And practically speaking, I think it was also really, really good. My opponent was low on time, I think, and it wasn't that easy to actually play this endgame for him. He decided to go rook e1. He wanted some counterplay on this e5 pawn. And also maybe, after I take on a2, he had some idea with knight g5, bishop d5, which always also happened in the game, which was really not so easy to parry. I still took on a2, and he played knight g5. The idea is now to either take on f7, because if I take with the king, he has this double check. He checks and takes the rook. Or play bishop d5 first, instead of taking on f7, and then threatening the rook and threatening bishop takes f7, which would also be a double attack and a check, like a skewer basically. Take on the king, take on the rook. So I had to do something against it. And I think I found a really nice way to defend against it, which is e4. I sack a pawn back. I was already up 2 pawns now, so if you're up material, sometimes it's also good to just give it back. And here I think it was a really nice idea, because I open up the e file if he takes, and he actually puts himself into a self pin, which is really helpful. I also open up my bishop, and now I'm threatening bishop d4. The same idea he had, I'm also attacking the rook, I'm also attacking the f pawn, with also his double attack on king and rook. So I did the same idea he did basically. He took on e4, and now I have to pay a bit of attention because after bishop d4, he has this knight f6 check. Um, so I have to pay a bit of attention. If I go away somewhere, just the rook is hanging on e8, so he would be winning. But luckily, I can just play rook e2, and now he has to trade the rooks. If he doesn't trade the rooks, I can take on e4 and get 2 pieces for a rook, and I still have my a4 passer, which will rather sooner than later promote into a queen. He took on e2, I took back, and he played rook c7. But now after bishop d3, he resigned because my rook is coming to the first rank, my pawn is going through. There's not much he can do against it, so he decided to resign in this position. Yeah, overall, I think I'm happy with the game, at least happier than the first game. It was quite a clean victory with black. After he allowed me to push a4, a5, I always had a quite easy to play position, I would say. And that's always also something you always have to go for. If you are like in some close position, you can always try to push some h5, h4, a5, a4. It's usually quite good. And this also helped me in this position. What I didn't like about this game was that I missed this before idea completely, which was really sad because it's actually quite symmetrical. Symmetrical. You want to actually close the position on the side you are worse, and he did that really good. If he had found the follow up with knight d2 in the game, it could have been really tricky. Luckily for me, he didn't. It was still a pretty nice game for my opponent, nonetheless. And okay, with 1.5 points out of 2, I hope to play some good opponent next game with white. Thank you for watching. See you next game.